nod your head. Okay. All right, so today's topic is the 850th anniversary of Shinran Shonin's birth and the 800th anniversary of Jodo Shinshu. And as you heard Bishop Ito say, it's hard to identify a starting date for Jodo Shinshu. However, our Honzan, both at Nishi Honganji and Higashi Honganji, have identified the year the first draft was made by Shinran Shonin of his master text, Kyōgyōshinshō. So today's talk, I would like to talk about the life of Shinran Shonin, and I will attempt to do the impossible, which is within an hour's time to give you a taste of the contents of the Kyōgyōshinshō and its significance, and why you should be, and what you can learn from it. Okay. I'm not going to talk so much about the actual anniversary celebrations and the special services that are planned at Honzan. Okay, so this story begins at Honzan because for most of you who are going on the tour, this is where we are going in April. And if you have not been there, Honzan, the mother temple, sits on land which is only a few short blocks from Kyoto Station. And I used to say it was the size of 2 city blocks, but really when I think about it, it's probably 3 city blocks or even more. It's a huge complex that's built like a fortress. And if you're interested in the history of the time after Shinran's death, up until the time that Honzan was built and later, there's another presentation I gave for the Buddhist Churches of America, which is called the History and Thought of Higashi Honganji and Nishi Honganji. And you can find that on YouTube if you search my name and Higashi Nishi. But I'm not going to cover that history right now, but I will talk about some other history. Starting with the time when Commodore Perry from the United States entered Tokyo Bay with his infamous black ships in 1853. This was the beginning of Japan's engagement with the West and with foreign countries after being closed off for nearly 200 years by the Tokugawa government. And this was the beginning of the modernization of Japan. And as you can tell from this picture, in 1853, it was still the age of the samurai, but that age was coming to a close. And Commodore Perry forced open the doors of Japan and at gunpoint demanded that Japan sign a treaty that would open up the country. This caused a lot of conflict within the country between forces who wanted to open the country and let foreigners in, and those forces that wanted to keep foreigners out. And during this time, a few years after that event in 1858, Honzan, Higashi Honganji Honzan, burned down in an accidental fire. So the 2 giant temples that make up the center of Honzan burned down at that time. But just a few years later, Higashi Honganji was to celebrate and observe Shinran Shonin's 600th year memorial service, which was a major event. So Higashi Honganji quickly erected 2 temporary structures in order to host this momentous occasion of Shinran Shonin's 600th memorial service. That was in 1861. But those forces, the anti-government forces and the pro-government forces, began to clash which resulted in a civil war erupting in 1868. And, oh, sorry, I actually skipped a slide here. So those two forces, the anti-government forces and the pro-government forces, that is the pro-government being those who wanted to open up the country, and the anti-foreigners, they clashed and they began fighting. And a big fight broke out in the city of Kyoto, which was the capital of that time, the ancient capital. So fighting broke out at this place called the Hamaguri Gate in 1864. And that started a large fire, which spread throughout the city of Kyoto. And these temples burned down again in 1864. So they had to be rebuilt. But in the meantime, the fighting continued throughout the country, resulting in the Boshin War. And here you have like the samurai who represented the traditionalists and many of those who wanted to keep the foreigners out, fighting the modern government troops who began to fight with muskets and cannons and to dress like modern day soldiers. And during that time, this period of time has been depicted in many films and entertainment, some of which you may have seen. And it was a time of much fighting, especially among samurai. So you'll see this depicted in many movies and TV programs. So this was the era that Higashi Honganji had to contend with. But they eventually did rebuild those two temples. And in 1895, they dedicated these temples in a ceremony in which many Jodo Shinshu followers came to Kyoto to celebrate the opening of these new temples. This is 1895. So here we are, and this year we are observing the 850th anniversary of Shinran Shonin's birth and the 800th anniversary of the founding of Jodo Shinshu. And you know, in our tradition, we want to observe these momentous occasions, and we do it at our own local temples as well. For example, in 2011 in Berkeley, we observed Shinran Shonin's 750th memorial service, along with the 85th anniversary of the founding of Berkeley Higashi Honganji. And, you know, I was the minister in Berkeley at this time, and 5 years before this, we observed our 80th anniversary. And so we got together, we had a big banquet, but we did not take a group picture. And afterwards, I was chastised for not taking a group picture because the person said to me, you know, it's a great thing for everyone to get together, because we don't know when we'll be able to get together again, or if people will even be alive for the next anniversary. And sure enough, if you look at this picture, and if you know some Berkeley people, you can see that some of these people are no longer with us. And so 5 years later, we observe our 90th anniversary in 2016. And we made sure we took a group picture, even though it was pouring rain, and you can kind of, if you look closely, you can see the rain coming down. So we all ran out there on cue and lined up, and as the rain began to soak us, the photographer snapped several shots, and within 5 minutes, we were back inside the temple. But observing these get-togethers and these commemorations are very important to us, and it's an important way of marking time. And just back in 2016, actually the same year that we had our 90th anniversary, we had the 12th World Dobo Gathering at the temple in Los Angeles, and people from different countries came to Los Angeles, and we had service together, and we participated in the 12th World Dobo Gathering. So these get-togethers are very important for us, and important for us to see each other as one Sangha. Of course, there are other events that we have at our local temples, such as Obon, and here's a picture of Los Angeles's Obon Odori. And we have various other events at each of the different temples. And of course, these activities include people of all ages, of all genders, adults and children and grandparents. And we have many activities, such as Junior YBA, like you see up in the upper right, Junior Youth Buddhist Association, a group for teenagers. We have Summer Bazaar. In Berkeley, we have sports teams, our Otani basketball team, observing Hanamatsuri, the Buddha's birthday, and of course, rummage sales. And so our Buddhist tradition is one that's very inclusive of families and individuals, of genders, and it doesn't matter what wealth, how wealthy a person is, how educated, everyone is meant to feel included. And it's this kind of Buddhism that has attracted various people, along with our two newest ordained ministers, Gregory Thomas, who's from France, and Gary Link, who's with us today, I see, who is from upstate New York. And sorry, Gary, I'm probably using this picture without your permission, but I took the liberty because I'm quite proud of the fact that you and Greg were able to get your Tokudo ordination, pictured alongside Reverend Nakura, who is based in New York. But none of this would be possible if not for the existence of one person. And who is that one person? And of course, it is Shinran Shonin. And Shinran was born in 1173 and lived for 90 years and passed away in 1263. Here's a statue that we have in our social hall. We call our social hall Otani Hall. And this is in Berkeley. And this statue stands at the entrance inside in the social hall. So the Shinran's story, Shinran's birth took place in the city of Kyoto, which I had mentioned was the capital of Japan for hundreds of years before it moved to Tokyo, formerly named Edo, in 1868. So to get you situated, here's a map of the city of Kyoto. And if you've ever been there or plan to go there, you will probably arrive by bullet train or some kind of train. If you can see my cursor moving along the bottom edge here, this is the train track of the bullet train and most trains, which arrives at Kyoto Station, which is at the very bottom. Kyoto is laid out in a grid, being a capital city that was based on ancient capital cities in China. So it's laid out like a checkerboard. So it's very easy to get around because the cities run north and south, east. I mean, the streets run north and south, east and west. And then, as I mentioned, if you walk a few blocks up from Kyoto Station here at the bottom, you see the square, which is unlabeled, but that is the Higashi Honganji right there. And I would like to talk about what's marked in red here with what looks like a swastika, which is actually a Buddhist symbol called a manji. And that temple is called Shorin-in. And this is where Shinran was ordained. And I want to point out one other place, which is on the upper right corner, which is Mount Hiei. And that's where Shinran spent 20 years of his life as a monk on this mountain. The Shorin-in temple is where Shinran was first ordained as a child at the age of 9. And if you plan on going to Kyoto for the tour in April, I believe we will be going there on the day that we tour Kyoto. And in fact, the picture, here's a painting of Shinran as a child being ordained at Shorin-in Temple. And these paintings with this particular style that you'll see in my presentation are hanging in a room that honors Shinran in Shorin-in Temple. So I took pictures of these pictures, which you will see on the tour. So it's said that Shinran came from a family that whose life was probably disrupted by this by the fighting among samurai and the different clans. And his father probably lost his position and disappeared somewhere. So Shinran's uncle took the young boy to be ordained so that he could become a monk and be taken care of and receive an education. And it said that he went there at nighttime, and he was at first turned away, but so impressed the abbot that the abbot allowed the young Shinran to be ordained at nighttime. And so our ordination ceremony, which Gary and Greg experienced in November, they close all the doors and they simulate this nighttime experience, and they only light the inside hall with a few candles. But because Shinran was ordained at the age of 9, Higashi Honganji allows children to receive this first level of ordination called Tokudo. And so you see Gary and Greg's Tokudo class here, and they're up at the top. But here you see some children in the front, and that's why children are allowed to be ordained, because of Shinran's experience. But I believe in Nishi Honganji, children are not allowed to be ordained, and you have to be 18 years old. This is the inside of the room that's dedicated to Shinran, where you'll see the paintings of his life. But there is a statue of a child, Shinran. So after Shinran was ordained, he was sent to Mount Hiei, which is next to the city of Kyoto. Kind of reminds me of Mount Tamalpais, the way Mount Tamalpais looks down on the city of San Francisco. And if you go up to the top, in the winter, it's a very harsh place. There's snow. And even to this day, if you go visit and walk around near the top or at the top of Mount Hiei, you'll see wild monkeys running around and other wild animals. And there are many, many temples there, all belonging to the Tendai sect of Buddhism, which is an older sect of Buddhism that's based on Chinese Buddhism. So Shinran spent 20 years of his life there. And it's a very strict form of Buddhism. So he probably practiced meditation, studied scriptures, practiced different forms of disciplines, and led a very strict monastic life. And here he's shown as being on Mount Hiei there during the winters, which were very cold. But there are many legends about Shinran's life that reflect his personality. So these stories may or may not be true, but they tell us something about Shinran's personality. And one of the stories, which is depicted in one of the paintings, is that there was a woman who wanted to hear the Buddha Dharma, who wanted to hear the Buddhist teachings. And so that woman began to walk up the path towards the temples on Mount Hiei. But Shinran was out walking on one of these paths and encountered the woman. So Shinran asked this woman, "What are you doing?" And the woman said, "Well, I would like to hear the Buddha's teachings. I would like to go up to Mount Hiei and hear the teachers and visit the temples." And Shinran said, "I'm sorry, but women are not allowed." And this woman says, "Well, if the Buddha's teachings are for everyone, why aren't women allowed?" But they were discriminated against. So this legend shows us that Shinran, as a person, as a young monk, was very sensitive to people's needs, and was very sensitive that there was this sense of discrimination and practice of exclusivity that he experienced on his Buddhist path. And so after 20 years, at the age of 29, he left Mount Hiei and he decided to abandon his life in the monastery. So he went to this temple called Rokkakuji Temple in Kyoto, in the city of Kyoto. Nowadays, it's located right in downtown Kyoto, not far from the main street. And we will probably visit this place on the tour. But Rokkakudo kind of reminds me of the House of Seven Gables. You know, it's like you have all of these different roofs here. It's a very unique looking temple. But the main image on the altar at this temple is Kannon. Kannon is the Bodhisattva of compassion. I forgot exactly what the image of Kannon looks like, but this is a typical image of Kannon. So this is not the exact image that's in that temple. Kannon is often depicted with 1,000 arms, so the 1,000 ways that compassion is extended to us, or 1,000 ways that we can practice compassion. So Kannon was a very popular figure during Shinran's time, and many people prayed to Kannon. So Shinran made a pilgrimage to this temple, vowing to visit this place for 100 consecutive days, hoping to come to some answer as to what he should do with his life. But on the 95th day of his pilgrimage, at night, when he was sleeping, he had a dream. And he dreamed that Prince Shotoku Taishi, who was the ruler of Japan in the 7th century, hundreds of years before Shinran's lifetime, but a revered figure during his life, because Prince Shotoku is credited with bringing Buddhism to Japan. And so he was Japan's first major patron, and he built temples and he supported teachers. And so Prince Shotoku appeared in Shinran's dream, and Prince Shotoku said in the dream that I will transform myself into Kannon, into this bodhisattva of compassion, and become a woman who will help you in your life. And so this dream has all kinds of meaning. And of course, later, Shinran eventually gets married to a woman who helps him, and together they raise a family. So after having this dream, Shinran decided to visit a teacher he had heard about by the name of Honen. And Honen at the time was an Eastern on the east side of Kyoto. And he was visited by people of many different stripes. So people of all ages, people who are educated, people who are uneducated, people who are poor, people who are wealthy, samurai, and other people of different classes. And Honen was becoming very popular because he had a message of universal salvation for all people, no matter who you were, that the Buddha's compassion was for you, and that you too could receive or attain a sense of spirituality and deep peace. And of course, this was the message of the Nembutsu, teaching people about Namu Amida Butsu and about Amida Buddha. And why was Honen so appealing to so many people? Because at the time, Buddhism had been in Japan already for hundreds of years, and it was well established. And there were gigantic temples already built. But these temples were, the patrons of these temples tended to be rich people, aristocrats, the royal court, the emperor. For example, this temple, which today is a major a tourist site called Todaiji Temple in Nara. It's a tourist destination because there's a gigantic statue of a sitting Buddha there, and it fills almost the entire temple. So there's not that much room to walk around inside the temple because the Buddha takes up most of the space inside that temple. That Buddha is probably about 3 stories tall. And this temple is, a lot taller than that, maybe 10 stories, maybe 8 stories tall, something like that. And it's considered the tallest wooden structure in the world. But the people who patronized these kinds of temples and these kinds of Buddhism were not poor people, were not farmers, and we're not people of all genders. You had to be part of an exclusive class, and that's why Honen really opened up the doors to all people with his Buddhist message of the Pure Land. So Shinran took Honen's message to heart and considered Honen his teacher. And he learned much from him. And he really started to follow this path of the Nembutsu. But during this time, the country of Japan was in upheaval. There were famines, there were droughts, there was still much fighting among the different clans, and there were assassinations and there were killings. And this was the type of society and the type of age that Shinran lived in. And also during this time, 2 of Honen's disciples visited some court ladies because they too wanted to hear this message of the Nembutsu. But they were accused of having an inappropriate liaison or relationship with these women. And they were encouraged to be persecuted by these other major Buddhist institutions who had strong connections with the court and with the emperor. So these 2 disciples were sentenced to death and they were executed. Honen, along with some of his senior disciples, were exiled. Shinran was sent away from Kyoto, which is down here on the bottom, and he was sent all the way up north to this area of Niigata. This is the area where Shinran was exiled, and we will visit that area if you signed up for the Niigata portion of the tour. And it is said that probably part of the way how Shinran got to Niigata was by boat. So I don't know exactly from where, but Shinran probably boarded a boat, took it up here along the Japan seaside, which is very, has big waves and rocky coasts, and then landed in Niigata. And Niigata, even today, is a very cold place. This is a recent picture of Niigata and the tremendous snowfall that they experience. And they say that snow stays on the ground for so many months out of the year. And it's such a harsh place to live. And this is where Shinran was banished to and had to live in exile. So here he probably just got off the boat, and here he's heading to where he was sentenced to live. So this is an interesting part of the story, because this event is actually ritualized at our Honko service that's held at the Honzan, the Mother Temple, in November. And if you are fortunate enough to go, or if you haven't been, I encourage you to go, because you can see the special ceremony and the special kind of chanting, which I'm told simulates that boat ride and Shinran being rocked by the waves. And I'd like to play for you a short clip of that chanting, which technically I'm not supposed to do because you're not supposed to take pictures in there, but I found this on YouTube. So I'm going to show it to you. Let's see. I need to get out of sharing here. Can I switch directly? Let's see. No, let's see. How do I get out of sharing? Stop share, okay? And then I'm going to share my YouTube video here. Sometimes when I play a YouTube video, the sound doesn't come out very well. Let's see. Wait a minute. Where is it? Right here. Right here. Okay. Sorry. Here it is. All right. Okay, now you should see the YouTube video, right? So I'm about to play it. I'm going to turn this up. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the chanting. It's a very unique way of chanting. If you can't hear it, at least just watch the action on the screen, okay? And they're actually chanting Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, but in a very stylized form.
Ken-san, could you read the chatting? And so we don't hear any sound. And maybe you just put in a YouTube link. And thank you. Later.
I guess people couldn't hear that.
No.
Okay. Well, sorry about that, but you could see the movement, right?
No.
Oh, you couldn't see it?
Oh. Maybe your side you can watch and hear, but
sorry about that. Okay, I'm just.
yeah, you can just put in a YouTube link later.
Oh yeah, okay. I'll send out the YouTube link later. All right. Now, can you see the PowerPoint again? Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so in Niigata, where Shinran was exiled, he still lived a life as a religious person, but technically he was no longer a priest. And he eventually was married and to a woman named Eshini, and they had 6 or 7 children. Okay, and there are many stories about Shinran during this time. And one of them, again, these are legends and they may or may not be true, but they tell you something about Shinran's life and about his personality. One of them, a mountain ascetic named Bennen, was intent on killing Shinran because he had heard about this person and who was exiled and who was some religious person, and Bennen was kind of a violent person. And so he thought he would just get rid of him. But when he approached Shinran with his sword and his bow and arrow, he felt some sense that Shinran was a special person and was a peaceful person and was someone who had a lot of compassion. And so Bennen threw down his weapons and decided to become a disciple of Shinran's. Shinran never did. Shinran dreamed of returning back to Kyoto and reuniting with his teacher Honen. But a few years later, Honen passed away, so he was never able to meet with him again. The Shinran decided to continue to stay in that Niigata and this north of Tokyo area. And there he traveled around the countryside and he met with many people who became his followers. And he did not have a temple. So he usually met in people's homes where they would have a Dharma meeting and they would have a discussion and he would give a talk. This is the origin of our Hoakai. For example, up here in Northern California, we have a Concord Hoakai. There's no temple in Concord, but they have meetings. And I understand in Los Angeles, you also have Hoakais too, occasionally in people's homes. So this is the origin of those kinds of meetings. But Shinran did eventually return to Kyoto, and he had access to libraries of religious texts and Buddhist research materials. And so he was able to write this master text of his, the Kyōgyōshinshō. And even into his later ages, he continued to rewrite and edit and revise the Kyōgyōshinshō. And here he's being helped by a woman who is probably here, Kakushini, his daughter, his youngest daughter. Shinran passed away at the age of 90, and here his daughter is mourning him along with some disciples. Kakushini was married to someone who had a large property on the eastern side of Kyoto, and she built a mausoleum for her father in which she installed her father's ashes. And so people would come from the countryside to pay their respects to Shinran's ashes in this building. And eventually an image of Shinran was enshrined in this building. And that building became the first Honganji temple. Today, the Honganji temple looks like this, our Honzan, which the two main buildings are the Amida Hall, which is the first one here, and then this building in the back, which is actually larger, and that's called the Goeido, or the Founders Hall. And on the altar, the main figure is Shinran Shonin. But you can see the origin of why the founder, Shinran Shonin, is enshrined is because it started way back during Kakushini's time. People go to Honzan and they go into the main building here and they see Shinran up there on the altar and they wonder why. Amida Buddha is in the Amida Hall next door. So Shinran wrote the Kyōgyōshinshō, and here's what it probably looked like when he wrote it. And of course, we have our English edition. And Higashi Honganji came out with an English edition in 1973, but they made a decision to print, printed a limited number of these, and it was printed on fancy paper, I think a persimmon stained paper, which darkens over the age. So this became, the feeling was that this is a very precious book and people should really take care of it and treasure it, which is a nice idea, but that meant that it was hard to get. And when I was a student of Buddhism in the 1970s, I didn't have a copy, and so we didn't study the Kyōgyōshinshō. And then and even in the 1980s. And it wasn't until 1997 that Nishi Honganji came out with the collected works of Shinran. And then the study of the Kyōgyōshinshō became much more widespread in English. But in the meantime, I just I'm giving you a sample of the types of books that we had to study back when I was a student at the Institute of Buddhist Studies and around that time. And we had Kubose's Everyday Suchness, which is like little anecdotal stories about Buddhism. There was the Tani Sho, which is a small text of Shinran's words. But mostly we had books like What the Buddha Taught, which is basic Buddhism, which is based on Theravada Buddhism. Zen was very popular, and there are many books about Zen that we could read. Mahayana Buddhism, so books more about general Buddhism, and then this book about different forms of Japanese Buddhism, but nothing really so specific about Jodo Shinshu as the Kyōgyōshinshō. The great Zen scholar D.T. Suzuki, who is well known in the United States and in the West for bringing Zen Buddhism to the Western world, in his later years became more and more interested in Jodo Shinshu and actually translated the Higashi Honganji version of the Kyōgyōshinshō. However, he passed away before he could finish the entire book, and he only translated 4 chapters, so that the Higashi version is incomplete. However, Suzuki, he understood Buddhism very deeply and spiritually. And instead of using, Kyo means teaching, Gyo means path, literally. And then Shin refers to Shinjin, translated as faith. So Kyōgyōshinshō, but he translated Gyo, path, as living, which is a great contribution because in his understanding, we understand the Buddhist path through our own lives, through everyday living. So the Kyōgyōshinshō is a collection of passages from sutras, commentaries, and other writings, quotes from ancient Buddhist teachers, along with Shinran's own comments and explanations. It's a very difficult book to read from cover to cover, unless you're a student of Buddhism and a student of Jodo Shinshu. It's more of a text that you study with a teacher, and you go back to certain passages and certain chapters over and over again over the years, and to deepen your understanding of what Shinran is talking about. But Shinran in the Kyōgyōshinshō traces the evolution of Buddhist thought through the seven masters, which he identifies of Pure Land Buddhism. So we have Nagarjuna, who lived in the 1st or 2nd century AD from India, followed by Vasubandhu, also from India. And then later, Tan Luan in China, Tao Chou and Shan Dao also in China. These teachers lived hundreds of years apart, and later Genshin in Japan and Honen. And so Shinran's point was that if you follow what these teachers said over the centuries, there was an evolution of Buddhist teaching, which resulted in what Honen was talking about, all of which can be traced back to Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. So what Honen and what Shinran are talking about come from the teachings of Shakyamuni. So this is really true Buddhism, the true essence of what Shakyamuni talked about. So in the preference of the Kyōgyōshinshō, Shinran writes, Amida Buddha's vow to save all beings is a great boat that takes us across an impassable ocean. It is the great light of wisdom that dispels our ignorance. How fortunate that I, Shinran, an old simple-minded ignoramus, should meet with sacred texts from India and Central Asia and commentaries by masters from China and Japan. How difficult is it to access them? Now I have them. How difficult it is to hear their message. Now I have heard it. I rejoice in what I have heard and cherish all that I have gained. So here Shinran is stating why he wrote the Kyōgyōshinshō, because he wants to share this understanding that he has come to by studying these teachers from India, from China, and from Japan. And this is something, a great boat that can take all of us to this land of wisdom. And in the beginning, near the beginning of the Kyōgyōshinshō, Shinran cites the story of when Shakyamuni Buddha explains the origin of Amida Buddha. And so this comes from the beginning of the larger sutra on the Buddha of infinite life, where the larger sutra on Amida Buddha. And in the sutra, it starts out that Ananda, who is a disciple of the Buddha and also Shakyamuni's, or before the Buddha became the Buddha was Prince Siddhartha. And so Ananda was Prince Siddhartha's cousin, okay, who became the Buddha's disciple. And Ananda accompanied the Buddha everywhere and had a photographic memory. And so he could recount all of the Buddha's teachings. But one day, Ananda noticed that the Buddha seemed to be glowing with a special kind of radiance. And so Ananda commented on that and asked the Buddha, is today a special day? Are you feeling differently or something? There's something about you that's glowing that I happen to recognize today. And so the Buddha says to Ananda, did someone ask you did someone tell you to ask me that question, or did you notice it on your own? And Ananda said, well, I noticed it on my own. And so Shakyamuni, realizing that Ananda, even though Ananda had accompanied the Buddha all along, that only now Ananda's mind was starting to grasp the wisdom that the Buddha was talking about, was starting to understand truth. And so Shakyamuni says to Ananda, listen carefully, Ananda, I will now tell you the story of Amida Buddha. And Ananda replies, with joy in my heart, I will listen. So this is what Shinran cites near the beginning of the Kyōgyōshinshō. What we recite at the beginning of every service in the three treasures, we say, difficult is it to receive human life, now we are hearing it. Difficult is it to hear the Buddha Dharma, now we hear it. If we do not awaken to the truth in this life, then in what life will we awaken? Let us take refuge in the three treasures of the truth. Right? So this comes from the Kyōgyōshinshō as well. So a passage that Shinran cites has resulted in this, what we say in the three treasures, and it very much reminds us of Ananda when Ananda began to hear the story of Amida Buddha. Most of you know the story of the parable of the two rivers and the white path, which comes from Shandao, who was one of the seven masters of Pure Land Buddhism. Shinran cites this story in you all need to mute yourselves. I hear somebody, so if you can kindly mute yourself. So this story comes from the Kyōgyōshinshō. Shinran noted this story in the Kyōgyōshinshō, and that's why we talk about it. And this story, in brief, is about a man who feels some sense of fear and anxiety and begins to run and realizes that he's being chased by these terrible people and bandits and bad people and people who are out to do him harm, and wild animals and strange creatures. And he comes to this bank of this river. On one side is raging water, and on the other side is raging fire, and he has nowhere to go. And he thinks he can go nowhere, that he's frozen and he's gonna die. But then he hears a voice of Shakyamuni Buddha behind him who says, go forth, you will be safe. And he hears a voice coming from the other shore of Amida Buddha who says, come forth, you will be safe. But yet the man still fears to go anywhere, but somehow takes a step and ends up in the Pure Land. So this, if you read it on the face, this story seems kind of crazy and full of superstition. But Shinran wants us to know about this story. But Shinran also cites the finger pointing to the moon parable in the Kyōgyōshinshō. And this comes from the Nirvana Sutra. And again, this is at the end of Shakyamuni's life when he's about to pass away, and Ananda is crying. Ananda is crying because the great teacher, the Buddha, is about to pass away. And Ananda, the Buddha says, why are you crying, Ananda? And the other disciples are crying, and Ananda says, because the great teacher will leave us, and once you leave us, who will teach us? Who will guide us? So Shakyamuni gives this talk, and he says, it says, when Shakyamuni was about to enter nirvana, he said to the bhikshus, from this day on, rely on dharma, not on people who teach it. Rely on meaning, not on words. Rely on wisdom, not the working of the mind. Rely on sutras that fully express meaning, not on those that do not. He goes on to say, words have meaning, but the meaning is not the words. Consider someone instructing us by pointing to the moon with his finger. To take words as the meaning is like looking at the finger and not the moon. The person says, I'm pointing to the moon to show it to you. Why are you looking at my finger and not the moon? Likewise, words are the finger pointing to meaning. They are not meaning itself. Hence, do not rely upon words. So we get this guidance in the Kyōgyōshinshō so that we are urged to dig more deeply into meaning, into symbolism. And so then when we look at the story again, we rather than take this story literally, if we look at what this story is trying to tell us, we can see that really this experience is happening in our own minds, that all of these bad things chasing us represent something about ourselves. They represent greed, they represent anger, they represent jealousy, they represent fear. And without any guidance, we have nowhere to go. We are frozen. We can't go anywhere. But we are encouraged by the Buddha's path, by Shakyamuni's words. We are encouraged, and we are encouraged by our own desire, our own aspiration for wisdom, our own aspiration to attain some sense of peace. That aspiration is symbolized by Amida Buddha. And so now this whole story takes on a whole different meaning if we look beyond the words. Likewise, with the story of Amida Buddha, what does Amida Buddha mean? Amida Buddha makes this great vow that all who sincerely call my name will be born in the Pure Land. In the Pure Land. What does that mean if we go beyond literally what these words are saying? What it means simply is that all those who walk on the Buddhist path, the path of the Nembutsu, can achieve great peace, can achieve great fulfillment in their lives, no matter who they are. And this was the message that resonated with all these different people, and that's why they gained access. This was their gateway onto the Buddhist path, because the traditional gateways onto the Buddhist path, these big temples, these big institutions, becoming a monk, becoming a nun, was not an accessible way for them to follow the Buddhist path. But Shinran was able, through this message, to encourage people to enter this path. And quite literally, if you go to Todaiji, the Buddha takes up most of the area of space inside the temple. But if you go to Higashi Honganji Honzan and you enter this great hall, you have this little altar at the far end, but most of the area of space in the hall is for the Sangha, is for us. It's for the followers. And so this type of Buddhism is really for us. Our altar is based on the story of the larger sutra, of the story of Amida Buddha, which Shinran tells us about in the Kyōgyōshinshō. And it said that in the Pure Land, there is a Buddha of infinite light and infinite life, of infinite compassion, who resides in a palace, in a place of great beauty, with many flowers, exotic birds, wonderful scents, beautiful music. Our altar in our temples are based on the story that comes from the larger sutra. Also, in that finger pointing to the moon parable, it ends by Shakyamuni saying, as to relying on wisdom, wisdom is able to distinguish and measure good and evil. The working of the mind always seeks pleasure. That means the working of the mind always seeks self-benefit, thinks about itself. We are always thinking about ourselves. We are always selfish. So if we rely on our mind, on our own tendency, we cannot reach the essential. Hence, it is said, do not rely on the mind. Rely on sutras that fully express the meaning. And among all the sages, the Buddha is foremost. Among all the scriptures, the Buddha Dharma is foremost. Among all human beings, the Sangha is foremost. So this is imploring us to follow the Buddha's path, the three treasures, the Buddha, the Sangha, the Dharma. Shinran Shonin took these words to heart, and really walk the path of self-reflection, constantly thinking about his own thoughts, his own actions, his own motivations. And he realized that he was a very selfish person. And he can only reach this conclusion by being brutally honest with himself. He wrote in the Kyōgyōshinshō, "How truly grievous that I, Gutoku Shinran," Gutoku means foolish, bald-headed one, "that I, Gutoku Shinran, am sinking in an immense ocean of desires and attachments, and lost in vast mountains of fame and advantage. I rejoice not at all at entering the stage of the truly settled, and feel no happiness at coming nearer to true enlightenment. How ugly, how wretched, that even though he is this learned Buddhist teacher, he still realizes that at heart he's still a very selfish person." He said in the Kyōgyōshinshō, "Though I cannot see the light that enfolds me because my eyes are blinded by self-centered desires, the heart of true compassion still, nevertheless, illuminates me." So he is embraced by by Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion, even though he is a selfish person. So with this understanding and this appreciation of this path that he gained from Pure Land Buddhism, he wrote this homage in which he summarizes the Jodo Shinshu teachings in the set of hymns which came to be known as our Shoshinge, which we chant almost every service. So in the Shoshinge, it summarizes Jodo Shinshu teachings, and it pays homage to the seven masters. Shinran is really appreciative because he was able to gain this understanding and follow this path thanks to his teacher Honen, which ultimately it comes from the teachings of Shakyamuni. In the Tani Sho, Shinran is quoted as saying, "If Amida's primal vow is true, Shakyamuni's teachings cannot be false. If Shakyamuni's teaching is true, Shandal's commentaries cannot be..." Well, I have to get rid of... Cannot be, I can't read that. Cannot be false. If Shandal's commentaries are true, can Honen's words be lies? If Honen's words are true, surely what I say cannot be empty. So here he is tracing his understanding all the way back to Shakyamuni. He wrote this he recorded this in the Kyōgyōshinshō. "I, Gutoku Shinran, disciple of Shakyamuni, discarded all other practices and took refuge in Amida's primal vow in 1201, which was during the time he was with Honen." So he made a commitment to the Pure Land path. He also stated in the Kyōgyōshinshō, "I am neither monk nor layperson." This kind of thinking is reflected in our practices today and in the way we become ordained in people who we call our ministers, because our ministers are not people who are exalted people, but we are all together fellow travelers. We are all on an equal level. And to really appreciate that feeling, you have to look at the traditional practices of Buddhism, that monks and Buddhist teachers were considered exalted people that were above the commoners. And so these people were on a different level than us, a different class. But Shinran encourages us, no, we are all on the same path and we are all the same level. In the Kyōgyōshinshō, Shinran warns us against practices of superstition and false beliefs. He wrote, "Take refuge in the Buddha, take refuge in the Dharma, take refuge in the Sangha. Do not serve other teachings. Do not worship devas," that means false gods. Do not enshrine spirits. No ancestor worship. Do not heed days considered unlucky, these superstitions. You know, these kinds of practices are very common, even at other types of Buddhist traditions, because you can go there and you can buy these good luck charms, right? Or you could pray for good wishes. And, you know, there's a joke among us Jodo Shinshu people, especially at our temples, because we have a hard time raising money. It's like, oh, well, we could make a lot more money if we sold these lucky charms, right? Because they would be hot sellers. But we're not allowed to, because Shinran warned us against this kind of teaching, because we should seek the truth. We should seek the ultimate truth about life and not get distracted by these ways of thinking that'll take us off the path. In the conclusion to the Kyōgyōshinshō, Shinran wrote these closing words. I've collected true words to aid others in their practice for attaining birth in the Pure Land, in order that this process be continuous, without end, without interruption, by which those who are born first guide those who come later, and those who are born later join those who have come before. This is so the boundless ocean of birth and death, meaning our suffering, may be extinguished. And so we come together to follow Shinran's teachings. Shinran's teachings form the heart and soul of our Sangha, of our community. And that's why we strive to be inclusive. That's why we strive to not treat others beneath us, or to rise and think that we are superior to each other. We try to include people of all stripes, rich or poor, young or old, all genders. We try to be welcoming because we are all the same, and we are all worthy of receiving the wisdom of the Buddha. And that's also thanks to the people who came before us, who carried on the Jodo Shinshu tradition, the Jodo Shinshu path, who built the temples, who support the temples, and who have all come before us, the generations before. All these people who, thanks to them, we are able to follow this path, and that we are able to have this temple and to cherish this precious tradition, so that those who have come before can join us who have come afterwards, and we who have come afterwards can join those who have come before, so that we all together can show our appreciation and show our gratitude to this, our great teacher, Shinran Shonin, so that when we go to Kyoto in April, you can feel the sense of history, of this tradition, of this precious teaching being passed down to each one of us, to you personally, to me personally, and that we can go and really observe this special occasion of Shinran's 850th anniversary of his birth and the 800th anniversary of the founding of Jodo Shinshu. And by the way, this picture is of me when I received my Kyoshi ordination 20 years ago in front of the statue of Shinran Shonin in the Founders Hall. And that will conclude my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.